it's like World War One, where there were about 10 places where World War One could have happened because all of the historic forces built up to it. And it just happened to be in Serbia. And we're in
Mhm.
the same place where we have all of these problems built up for a historic crisis. We just haven't seen where the match gets lit, where the entire floor is covered in gunpowder. I don't think people have really realized the potential that the internet has for group organization or for strategy, where you could launch a revolution out of a subreddit if you wanted. I was in Peru when COVID hit. January of 2020, we had no idea what was going on, and in March, our entire lives had changed.
One new idea that I encountered recently, and it's funny because it's like Tim Pool's always talking about Civil War, and I always like kind of threw that away. I'm like, okay, he's just like insane. But then I read the fourth turning is here and the Peter Turchin book like back to
Yeah.
back, and there's so much overlap. Cleodynamics is this science of history. I'm going, oh, I never encountered any of this stuff before. So now all of a sudden I'm listening to Tim Pool and all the stuff he's saying. It seems kind of plausible here.
I mean,
So
I don't know where else we can go because in the modern America, we don't really think things can get as bad as they can. But if you read enough history, you realize
yeah,
it's bad
exactly.
all the time. And I look at our politics where I like we can't agree on anything, or we're so silly, and there's entrenched interests everywhere where I mean, people talk about how you buy a house, you have to get your interior decoration improved by the local zoning board. You have to get your back fly screen approved by the local zoning board. And it feels like things are so tense. And I don't know if it'll be a civil war. Because the reason I say that, I bet good money that we'll have political violence in the next couple of years. Um, I don't know if it'll be a civil war, because I think the right would just win.
Hmm.
And because when it comes to military power, the right has the army, or most of the army, the police, young men as a general demographic, and aggressive young men especially. Um, it has control of resources, a centralized location. Um, and I could be wrong here. It could be because I always say on my show, I'm betting against God, and there's a billion ways to, infinity ways to be wrong, and only about a handful to be right.
True.
Um,
Yeah.
and so I could be miscalculating where enough of the military tilts left that we would have a civil war. But my best guess is the right kills the left, and then we kind of fracture into warlords and conflict between the right because the right doesn't have enough internal unity and um and also due to the breakdown of law and authority, which is something I'm working on a video right now where, for example, almost no cities in America have budgets. So something bad happens, every major city in America can't pay for police officers or social workers. And what happens once you've, like the Andrew Tates of the world, have congregated armies of young men to follow their orders?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, I
It's
think
kind of bleak.
in terms of like the who would win this, like a quote civil war, I think it would depend highly on the context of why it's happening. Because
Yeah,
like if like for example, if Trump got Pence to throw out the electoral votes from those swing states and they just declared Trump, president, and that kind of degraded into some kind of civil war situation. Like I'm not sure the military, even if most people in it leaned right wing, I'm not sure that they would say, well, we're going
yeah.
to support this like very
You're
anti-demographic and anti-democratic, thing that's just happened.
you're exactly right. The one condition where I see the left winning is where they basically bait the right into doing something retarded, and then the right gets fried. Um, where and that's a really plausible scenario. Um,
Mhm. I mean,
and
we're seeing it. I feel like
yeah,
so.
I mean, you're looking at the next like I don't even know. I think we have about a year and until stuff gets bad because I don't think either side will trust the results for this next election
Probably.
unless one side wins by a landslide. And then
Mhm.
even if like the polls now say Trump is leading by 10 points, even if that happens, I'm not sure the Democrats would accept that. And so um but also, I mean, you guys saw how we passed a budget for 45 days and it only barely passed.
Yeah.
And if the government shuts down, what happens next? And I mean, what happens if Trump goes to jail? There's all these. It's like World War One, where there were about 10 places where World War One could have happened because all of the historic forces built up to it, and it just happened to be in Serbia. And we're
Mhm.
in the same place where we have all of these problems built up for a historic crisis. We just haven't seen where the match gets lit, where the entire floor is covered in gunpowder.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
hard because like, and I remember watching this, and this kind of blackpilled me watching kind of the build up to Russia invading Crimea. And I'd watch like a lot of the Ukrainians kind of interact with the Russians and all this stuff. And it seemed like everyone was kind of LARPing until they weren't. And I've kind
Yeah.
of come to this like bad idea that people basically LARP themselves into war. Because it's hard to like right now, I look around, I'm like, yeah, I see a lot of people are very divided. I see a lot of people very angry, but it's still hard for me to conceptualize how that turns into some kind of like factions fighting each other in the streets, you know,
Yeah,
over
it's,
politics or something.
one of the points Turchin makes is that we don't have like revolution organizations. But what I'd say is that the internet allows that very easily,
Mhm.
where I don't think people have really realized the potential that the internet has for group organization or for strategy, where you could launch a revolution out of a subreddit if you wanted. I mean, that might be a bit far because you get banned, but and also you only need a single match to go off, and then people start organizing. And I agree. It's LARPing until it isn't. And think of COVID, where people in that field were saying that we were due for a pandemic for decades, and then COVID hit. And I remember I was in I was in Peru when COVID hit, and I had a friend from China who called me up and he said, "This stuff's really bad. You need to get back to America now." And then I got out of Peru on the last flight that they had to America.
Wow.
No, it was the last flight, and I got there on the last call. But things like this shit can go down really fast if all the variables are lined up. And I mean, January of 2020, we had no idea what was going on, and in March, our entire lives had changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just, it's still just hard for me to think about like, I mean, I can see a world where, you know, Antifa or leftist groups and Proud Boy like groups are like basically fighting each other, but it's still
Yeah.
just it's too difficult for me. My brain, my imagination is too limited to kind of conceptualize like, you know, the Congress is like doesn't exist, or like the Republicans and
Yeah.
Democrats are in the streets like shooting at each other. Like even if Trump gets arrested, I can't really see that unless something really insane happens regarding the election.
They
Like,
have
I
first
agree with that.
they have firsthand accounts of like the Civil War and stuff, and people during the Civil War didn't see it coming.
Yeah.
So I mean, like
yeah, but
if-
there's a big difference. Like, so in the Civil War, it's like there's literally just this fear of your entire life in the South is going to be changed by getting rid of slavery. Like this entire, like this instant, there's a very specific, very physical, very tangible thing that's happening. Where with this, it's kind of etherical, like what exactly, you know, it's people like debating over politics. Like obviously material conditions are making everyone crazy, but there's not like a specific material condition everyone's like really focused on as the central point here.
they incarcerate Trump.
Yeah, but I don't think that's enough.
You don't think that's enough to
No.
really?
Incarcerate Trump, election doesn't work out. I mean, for all of the secular crises, or most of them, what the thing that spurs it is a budget problem.
Mhm.
And that's how the French Revolution started, where ironically, the French government doing the American Revolution was one of the biggest things that caused the French Revolution, because they couldn't afford to support the American colonies, where the French government just couldn't pay its bills, and they convened the Congress together. And then the Congress said, unless you don't turn France into a democracy, we're not going to let you raise taxes. And then that's what caused the French Revolution. And that's pretty common. And so if I had to bet on anything, it would be that the next time we try to pass a budget,
Mhm.
it just doesn't work. And that sounds kind of nerdy, but like, I mean, it's like, imagine you're married and you hate your partner and you get into an argument over money. The number one cause for divorces is money problems. And that's my best bet. And I mean, we've barely passed it the last couple times where, and each time it's passed with the Republicans making concessions, but past a certain point, you end up in a situation where the leaders are incentivized to launch a civil war, because by launching a civil war, they get to stay in power. And if they make concessions, they won't get reelected.
I mean,
Well-
I can always think of a dozen things. Like what
Yeah.
if the election is contested and Putin invades a NATO country during the contested election? What if
Yeah.
Putin invades a NATO country during
Pluto.
another January 6th? Like there's a million things that I can think of that could happen to really take the wheels off of this
Yeah.
thing.
It's like it's interesting where a couple years ago I would have unanimously supported, if China invaded Taiwan, I would have supported America going to war with China. And I don't support that anymore because I think if we had a war with China now, it would break the US.
Do you think Putin and China are talking to one another? What
Yeah,
if
they're
China
allies.
what if China takes Taiwan at the same exact time Putin invades Poland?
One of my friends, Philippe Fabry, he kind of does the same stuff I do, where he uses the cycles of history to predict the future, and he's based out of France. And that's what he predicts, that Putin will go after the Baltics afterwards. I personally think Putin would be insane to do that because the Russian military's performance in Ukraine, like, they wouldn't survive an invasion of a NATO.
Look, he doesn't have to be insane. He just has to have nothing to lose, which I think you can
Yeah.
make an argument that he has nothing
But
to
he has
lose.
to have something to
That's what
gain,
Peter
though.
Zeihan says is, and I just finished. I have a video in the works for why I think Russia will have a revolution in the next couple of years. And I mean, past a certain point, I don't know. Chaos. I'm betting against God. It could happen. I can't say. But
Putin
if-
right now is praying for a contested election. You know he is because
Yeah.
he's hanging on by the skin of his teeth in Ukraine, and he knows if America and Europe stop sending them weapons, it's over.
I also think that as a young man in Russia, I don't know why I'd be fighting. Because I'd imagine they have the same economic and dating and whatever problems we have in America. And if you're just going to be cannon fodder in a useless war, why don't you mutiny? And yeah, I think the Chinese and the Russians could go for that. And if we had to wage a war, it's like extra couple problem where you have a couple that's already worried about money and they fight over how they spend it. And then their mother has an enormous medical bill, and the husband hates his wife's mother anyway. And so he's not going to give away his money for that. And then they divorce. It's kind of a similar situation.
Yeah.
Mhm. Do you think though, is it the budget that's the problem, or is it people in terms of how the economy is doing? Like if we had
Everything.
if we had like a 2008 housing crash now, like again, they're all worried about the commercial housing market and stuff like that. Like maybe that would cause the problem because with the budget stuff, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm assuming with France at the time, they were not on fiat currency. So I feel like now the government can just basically print itself out of any problem.
A
It's,
stock market crash, though, you can't really print yourself.
That's why I'm saying,
Yeah.
yeah, I
exactly.
mean, I think all of the above's going to happen because we're at a place where I think we have to have a stock market crash or some kind of equalization of the stock market. I actually think it's a decently likely scenario that like rightist rebels just wipe out the major coastal corporations. I think if you have a rightist revolution, there's a solid chance they just wipe out Hollywood and Silicon Valley, and they might leave Wall Street.
When you say
But
wipe out, are you talking about economically or like with force? Like
Yeah,
violent
let's
force?
hope it's
before.
economically. I live here.
with force,
Mhm. You think like people are gonna like
Because-
march into Apple and stuff? Like what do you mean?
why not? I mean, they don't
Okay.
like those companies anyway.
Right.
And I mean, with these historical cycles, you have to see inequality decline, and that can either be violent or peaceful.
Mhm.
I'm sorry if that's a black pill, but but
Yeah,
What
no, that's Turchin's thesis, the overproduction of the elites. The only way that you can deal with it is you make the elites not so elite anymore. And there's two ways historically that we usually do that. It's with guillotines or financial crashes, right?
yeah, and I mean, what we've seen recently is the labor shortage, and I do wonder how much of our stuff with immigration, complete open borders is due to the labor shortage, where upper class left leaning Americans want there to be an infinite sponge of immigrants because of the labor shortage. And the thing is, once you have a labor shortage, you can't have a giant stock market because the stock market is driven by the upper class. And you would need to see an equalization. And I've been really shocked that we haven't had a stock market crash so far. And what we've basically just seen is poverty among everyone else. But because the upper classes are largely doing fine, the stock market continues to function. But I mean, it's what we would see with inflation to prop up the rest of the economy is basically the attacks of the lower classes, because the lower classes are the ones that get hit the hardest by inflation, because they're the ones where if the price of pork goes up 20%, it really hurts them, or if the price of housing. And the reason the price of housing has gone up so fast is because of inflation, because if you have an inflating currency, the housing market is a stable, real asset. And the government can't push that button for much longer until everything falls apart.
Yeah. Sitch, where do you want to go?
So I don't know if you saw
Hi, you just listened to a clip from the Sitch and Adams show. If you like what you heard, you can listen to our live show right here on this channel on Sunday, starting at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. And if you want, you can super chat us. We read $20 and up super chats on the show and then do a follow-up stream on the following Tuesday where we read the rest of the unread super chats and interact with fans of the show. Subscribe to this channel right here to listen to the live show or to listen to more of our awesome clips.